Okay, so, all right, Jimmy, let's do this. Let's get
All right.
started. Here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Mallory Johnson, 26-year beauty veteran, fractional COS, and strategist. Welcome back to Pretty Equity, where we tackle the real issues facing beauty founders and investors and bring you the answers from the experts behind the deals. Back in episode 15, I talked to procurement and supply chain expert Paige Lowell about supply chain from the top and gave you guys a map, procurement strategy, packaging risk, and how to vet your contract manufacturer. Today, though, we're going to go into the territory. My guest is Jimmy Salerno. Jimmy has run supply chain from the inside at both an indie scaling brand, Natalist, the women's wellness label under Everly Health, and a luxury beauty brand, Le Prunier. Today, Jimmy is Today Jimmy is a fractional operations leader and operations manager at Bravo CPG. And what makes this conversation different is that Jimmy hasn't just consulted on supply chain problems. He's been the person responsible for fixing them when they broke. So, peeps, buckle up because we're going deep on operations today. The documentation that doesn't exist, the vendor relationships that aren't managed, the COAs that nobody reads, and the lead times that nobody believes until the crash. And believe me, these mistakes are avoidable, but seem to happen anyway. Jimmy, welcome to Pretty Equity, my friend. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you, Mallory. So good to catch up with you. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we jump in, I just want to remind the viewers, for those of you particularly who are new to beauty, that the basics of supply chain, everything you need to know from a high level, you'll find in episodes 15. So I highly recommend you go back and watch that episode first, then come back to this one as a follow on. Anywho, Jimmy. I want to start by getting the audience inside the function because most founders picture supply chain as a vendor list and a shipping date, right? I want to correct that picture. So describe what a typical week actually looks like running supply chain for an indie brand. What are you actually doing day to day?
Yeah. This is a interesting question because I don't think any week has ever looked the same. Even in like kind of these, brands that I've worked in that are like well-oiled machines, they have their process. Monday you do this, Tuesday you do inventory, submit your new purchase orders, Wednesday's vendor communication day. Like that you have your specific days, but truly like things pop up all the time. It's really like triaging. And firefighting is like what we like to call it as well. But I would say like, 40% of my week is like I'm in Excel, spreadsheet, data analysis, things like that. Just really making sure our systems and our processes in place are like working and there's nothing inherently like broken, that to the naked eye. And then I would say, 30% is, vendor communications, working with our co-packers, our manufacturers, our packaging suppliers, even just internal communication for new projects and things like that. I will say 20% is definitely firefighting, and I would say that 20% of firefighting is the most to ebb and flow between like 20 to 50%. Sometimes it's 5%. You're having a great week. I always joke that the front end of my week is the most stressful because it's the most time that I have for something to go wrong that I have to fix. Once I get to Thursday, Friday, it's like, okay, things are going pretty well. The problems have been fixed. Like, let's ourselves up for success for next week. And those kind of Thursday, Friday days are really great for strategic planning and long-term focus. A lot of the times, those days, short-term issues, short-term problems, been able to fix throughout the week. And we can really start to look down the road, like month 2 months, 3 months, even quarter, or even a year. So I would definitely say those first, Monday, Tuesday is very stressful. Wednesday, you're like, oh, we're almost there. Then Thursday, Friday, you kind of, are able to kind of focus long term of how to, keep the machine running, and make sure there's, nothing broken behind once you lift up that curtain.
Okay. Okay. I mean, it's a lot. Operations, it's a lot. But, founders often think supply chain is handled only once the supplier or CM is selected. What are they not understanding about what's going on from a management point of view? So
Mhm.
what do they not understand about what's ongoing management actually requires?
Yeah. I think the contract manufacturer selection, even 3PL selection for any brand. Once you make that decision, sign that contract, that's really the starting line. Everything that you've done prior to that, it's like training for a marathon, right? Like you don't just like wake up and like run a marathon. Like you have to train, you have to, and that's kind of like the vetting process. It's your training process to make sure that the supplier that you're going to be working with is the perfect fit for your brand. And then once you sign that contract, get in there, start producing, start fulfilling, start working together. That's really the starting point. And it's like anything else in your business, or like a pipe in your house. Like everything requires maintenance and upkeep. It's not something that you can just like set and forget because with a lot of these like indie brands and scaling brands, like your business, what it looks like today is going to be night and day a year ago. So you have to be working with your partners to not only you know, scale your business, but also sometimes scale theirs. Because, a lot of the times you're working with, if you're an indie brand, you could be working with indie manufacturers that, you're their biggest client. And so if you're going to, 2x the size of your business in a year, you have to make sure that your manufacturers can support that scale. And a lot of the times when you're scaling at like these fast paces, that's when things start to break a lot faster. And so it requires more and more upkeep to just make sure that, hey, like we're in this together, like we're moving together. I'm not up here and you're back there. Like it's just making sure that you're on the same page and fostering those relationships is one of the most important aspects of supply chain because, without your partners, you're going nowhere. So
No, absolutely. And I mean, we're going to get to, talking about partnerships in a bit, but
yeah.
at this segment, you've worked inside both a women's wellness brand and a luxury beauty brand. There is a two very different operating environments. So,
Mhm.
what operational differences surprised you most between the two?
What actually surprised me the most was quality control metrics are vastly different. When obviously there's a baseline quality control when it comes to safety, when it comes to consistency, things like that. But, in terms of when we're talking medical devices and supplements and things like that, there's a lot less quality around aesthetic. Because, you're just really like if a consumer is consuming the product, you're much more concerned about safety and like mold and like just making sure that when they're consuming something, it's safe for their body and they're not going to have any like severe complications. When you're talking beauty or kind of like luxury brands, you're really focused on glass quality, packaging quality, formula quality, just the different price points. You're really just making sure that you're providing the most luxurious product possible. Safety is still very important. I don't want to make it seem like it's not, but it's definitely like tenfold almost more important. The safety and the quality and the luxuriousness of the product is tenfold when you have that higher price point. So, the quality control metrics are similar, but they're just so much more stringent and strict that like you have to just pass everything with flying colors. Like if something's a little bit off, it triggers a whole process of how do we fix that when
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of at those different price points for sure. The other thing is just in general, like supply chain complexity. Typically, um, depending on the size of the brand, the price point of the brand, these more luxurious brands have more complex supply chains because they're sourcing specialty glass, they're sourcing specialty ingredients, they're sourcing all of these kind of um, sometimes new to market aspects of their product to where, these lower price point, brands, not that they're not sourcing um, great products, stable products, good for you products, but typically the supply chain is a little bit more straightforward, which also helps the COGS, helps the price point, and things like that. So I definitely think being on the two ends of the spectrum, it makes sense. But going into it, I didn't expect it to be so obvious of the complexity that requires for a much higher price point product versus, a lower price point for sure.
Well, yeah, I think that the priorities are also so different, the mindset is so
Mhm.
different. But, to close out this segment, so what breaks first when a brand doesn't have dedicated supply chain support? Where do those cracks actually show up first?
Yeah, I would say inventory from my experience. I talk to a lot of brands that either they're growing too fast, they can't keep up stock, or they've been kind of a little bit of PTSD of a stock out to where they almost like overstock. To me, inventory is the most glaring issue of like something's wrong. And the easiest to sense. It might not be the first thing that breaks, but it's going to be the first thing that you're noticed because it affects sales, it affects marketing, it affects finance. I mean, it affects the whole business if you stock out. Um, and I think like that creates this domino effect of kind of what I talked about earlier. It's like you stock out, you overstock, then all of a sudden you're talking with your suppliers and your company's like, okay, we got to fix this, creates tension, creates chaos, creates this kind of like, it just doesn't help the relationships that you're building either. And so it kind of creates this domino effect of inventory breaks and it just leads to a lot of other problems that are costly and that take a long time to fix. I think the one thing about supply chain is you can't fix it overnight. It takes time and it's a grueling process to fix a supply chain that's inherently broken. And it's like everyone wants that quick fix, overnight fix, but it's going to take months sometimes, especially depending on your lead times and things like that.
Mm, And again, and we're going to talk about it in a bit, but it comes back to relationships.
Yeah,
Relationships, trust take time to build. So,
right.
a lot of these types of things of supply chain, accessibility comes down to your relationships with your suppliers.
Right,
But like I said,
100% because they can help fix the problem or they can almost add to it. And not that anyone's out there, working against you, but having those relationships, having that fair contract, having kind of like, hey, what can we do to help our co-manufacturers and co-packers' lives easier will make them want to help us and create a long-lasting partnership that's able to kind of go through these ebbs and flows of issues.
Okay. So we have the picture now of what the function actually looks like from the inside and where the cracks appear, um, when there's no one actually running it, right? But now I want to get into the core of this conversation. So we were talking up here. Now I want to get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah.
The specific avoidable mistakes founders make by trusting without verifying. Because this is the big one, and this was the bane of my existence. Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm going to push you here for real examples, though, because the more concrete this gets, the more useful it is for the audience. So, Jimmy, what is the most common operational mistake you see beauty founders make? The one that's entirely avoidable, but just keeps happening repeatedly.
Um, the first topic that comes to mind is kind of around resource management, but also planning the business and not anchoring that plan in supply chain reality. Um, you know, we talk a lot about brand scaling, how to scale the business, whether it's launching in thousands of retail stores next month, whether it's launching 3 to 4 products next month. Um, there's a lot of planning and um, there's a lot of resources that go into planning that. And I think the issues that come up is when you plan something without anchoring it in the reality of your supply chain, whether it be lead times, whether it be cash flow, whether it be, you know, I would probably say those are the two ones that, making sure you have the inventory for when you want to launch it or when you want to launch into those retail stores. Um, you've also wasted the resources of marketing, the resources of sales, the resources of finance to plan out all of these things that were never going to happen because your supply chain is not built for that timeline. And that's why I feel like um, supply chain and operations always needs kind of like a seat at the table to plan out your business because you need to understand if you want to launch a product May 6th, we needed to start this process 2 months ago. Let's see, like, let's map out the project now together. We can see, okay, this needs to happen then, this needs to happen then, testing here, packaging, ordering here, and see how it shakes out, and we can see what we can do. But I do feel like a lot of issues come up where oh, we're going to see a huge revenue bump in May because we're going to launch this product. Well, that product needed to, that project for that product needed to start a month ago, or 2 months ago, or however long. And I think that misplanning creates a lot of waste in your business because you're not only wasting or you're not only like misplanning revenue, but you're also wasting the resources that you have at your disposal and across your departments. And I think that it's not so much even like a supply chain issue. It's a planning issue for sure.
And 100% because, planning, there's a whole lot of things that come into planning. It's not just about having ideas and writing them down on a piece of paper, right?
Right.
And then saying, okay, these are our plans, we're going to implement them. But trusting without verifying, okay? To me, it's like that should be part of the plan. I'm not going to, you need to decide who your partners are going to be, whether they're CM suppliers, even R&D. All of these are partners that you're choosing. You're not
Right.
just going to pick someone because, I don't know, you pulled a name out of a hat, right? So let's just talk a bit about trusting without verifying.
Mhm.
What does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah.
Because I want the audience to understand if you can give me a specific scenario, because like I said, to be able to actually picture it is important.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think a great scenario is something that supply chain professionals do every single day. And I said earlier that 30% of my week is vendor communication. And that's the verifying part is, the communication with your vendors to verify, there are eyes and ears, boots on the ground. So we have to be communicating them to verify that what we think is happening is actually happening. And if it's not, we need to kind of align. So I think it's a generic example, but I think it's very fitting. But you got a 12-week lead time, you place a PO, say, okay, in my calendar production plan, place the PO April 29th. Okay, 12 weeks, it should be ready July 29th. Um, and you set it, forget it, and then you reach out to your supplier, July 21st. Hey, booking the truck, getting ready to pick up, my order, and they say, "Oh, actually, it's only 50% done. Like we need an extra 4 weeks." And that those are things and those are items where the relationship, going back to that part, is so important. And having the lines of communication open. And I mean, even just getting a call at 11 a.m. from your supplier to let you know what's going on. Like it's just that those communication and those kind of phone calls are so important because it verifies your process, it verifies um, the lead times, and it also verifies the trust with the supplier because you're trusting them to get it done, but you need to verify along the way that everything's working as smoothly as possible. And that's like a big part of supply chain and our jobs is just to make sure that, when we order it, it gets here on time to the best of our ability.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned set and forget.
Yeah.
So this is a big one. Just because you've checked off a box on your list of to-dos, right, doesn't mean the person on the other end has done the same. And the point that you make about communication is so important because to me, the one of the biggest red flags with any partner is lack of communication. You know
Hmm.
what I mean? When they're not telling you that they're facing a problem on their end, it's like this is going to come crashing down on you. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like I understand
Right.
they're scrambling on their side to try to fix it. But you know what? Sometimes if you tell someone right from day one or right at the moment you realize there could be a problem, hey, Jimmy, we're having an issue. You know what I mean? Like the supplier we were working with doesn't have this thing anymore. We might have to switch. You know what I mean? These are conversations that they can't hide from you.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want to react to that.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think it's a great call out because a lot of these kind of indie scaling brands, like they rely on co-manufacturers and co-packers to source materials for them. They don't have a full purchasing team that can manage every single ingredient, every single supplier of that ingredient. So we do rely on our partners at the co-packer to procure for us. And it's a whole um, it's definitely a whole visibility issue that founders need to have and supply chains need to have of like understanding, okay, this is the formula. We know that the co-packer is going to source this ingredient, but really understanding where are they sourcing that ingredient from and what's the lead time on it. And kind of digging a little bit deeper and not just trusting that they're going to get it on time, but having that information of like, if I place a PO, I know that they have a 12-week lead time for this ingredient because they source it overseas from Italy or Spain or so it's like understanding that your co-packers also have their own supply chain and that supply chain of your co-packer is a part of your supply chain. So it's not just like, oh, we placed an order to the co-packer and then it arrives. It's like there's that whole process behind the scenes that you're um relying on your co-packers to communicate what's happening in that supply chain to you so that you can be prepared for, you know, worst case scenario or what's going to come down the pipeline.
Before I ask you the next question, I want to make sure the audience knows what we're actually talking about because this is one of those terms that gets just thrown around loosely, and that's the COA, the Certificate of Analysis. All right, so a COA is a document from a supplier or a third-party lab that confirms that the material or the product that they've sent to you meets specified quality standards, right? Identity, purity,
Hmm.
microbial limits, heavy metals, whatever's in the spec, right? And what I find is that founders receive these obviously all the time, right? Anytime you put in a request for an order for something, you're going to receive your COA.
Hmm.
Most of them, I don't know, they open the PDF, they see that it exists, then they file it and move on, right? And the problem is that this is not what's supposed to happen with a COA. So, Jimmy, I want to just talk to you a bit about COAs because once they
Hmm.
land in your inbox, what should actually happen with a COA?
Yeah.
Walk us through what a real COA review looks like and what most founders don't realize they're skipping.
Yeah. I kind of even want to take it one step further and talk even about like lock codes, right? Um, because I think that lock codes, traceability, testing, you know, it's all about safety and also like to ensure, like you said, the product that you're selling on the market matches the product that we manufactured at the facility. That being said, I think the biggest thing with these COAs is traceability. And I think that starts with the lot code. And I think a lot of times it's almost similar to like a SKU number and an internal part number of like ensuring that the process and the SOP for those is it makes sense. It's not just numbers on a bottle, it's not just numbers in a spreadsheet. Um, a lot of times those numbers are factors that supply chain professionals use to trace back to the facility. So, you'll use line numbers. Like if a co-packer has 5 lines and everything was produced on line 3, typically there'll be kind of a signify in that lot code for that. Whether it's a certain facility, things like that. And so I think when you're tracing back your product, really understanding the facility that you're producing in and when you're producing in a facility that it's large, it's producing thousands of units per day, per hour, even sometimes, and really just understanding what part of the facility you were produced in, what line you were using, who was on it, things like that can be attributed to your lot code. That then is kind of the signifying item on the COA to prove that on this line on this day, this product met specification.
Mm,
And that is the most important thing when you receive a COA is just ensuring that what they're sending the COA for matches how you're filing it and what's in your records. Because if there's ever an issue, you need to be able to look at that COA and know exactly when and where that was produced, um, and where it was also distributed. So I think like that's the first thing, ensuring lot code, batch numbers, everything is meeting the specifications there, before we even get to test results, test methods, things like that. It's
mm,
lot
mm.
code ensuring accuracy and everything is lining up.
Yeah, yeah. I think the key there is traceability.
Yep.
You know, the key is traceability because I don't think a lot of founders realize that it's not just a piece of paper that they're being handed, you know what I mean? It's not like some kind of a receipt, right?
Right.
This thing is going to become a part of a larger document set. And you know, particularly if you are, yeah, I mean, it's required here in the United States. It's just you know, unlike Europe, we don't have a named safety assessor position as they do in Europe. But, you know, that document, that dossier of documents, you know what I mean? This is a part of that dossier that's going to be required, you know, when you are ready to move, whether it's in the US or and another thing as well about traceability is that, you know, from an investor standpoint, you know, if you're ready to invest in a company that doesn't have their ducks in a row,
Mhm.
you know, it's going to cost a lot of time going back and trying to find all of the documents that are required for each and every single raw material, right?
Yeah.
And how many raw materials do you have in a formula? You know, some formulas are pretty robust in their material, you know, in their RMs. But you know, and their ingredients. But each and every single one of those has documents attached. And how many
Hmm.
months are you going to waste? You know what I mean? Going back and trying to find those documents in order to create the dossier that you need to hand to a retailer, to hand to a distributor,
Right.
to, you know, and again, like I said, I'm not sure if you want to comment on that before we move on to the next topic, but I just, you know, wanted to stay on Doxia for a sec.
Yeah. No, 100%. I think, I feel like all of our conversations keep leading back to supplier relations. It really does because, going back to the indie scaling brands who maybe have one operator, um, you know, one product team member just like kind of like one person per department type of environment, you rely on your suppliers for the majority of that documentation. And you have to trust that they're using accredited labs, that the test methods are correct.
Hmm.
Really ensuring that the specification and the results are as accurate as possible, and even down to the decimal point, right? Um, because a lot of the times those test results and all of those documents that you talked about are actually not shared because they're shared and compiled into that one document that is the COA. But to your point, it's important that you know all of the ingredients that came in were properly tested, passed micro testing, passed, heavy metals testing, whatever it may be. And that is something where, picking the right supplier is incredibly important because if they can't skip those parts. And you have to trust them that they're going to have their own quality procedures that meet your standards.
Mm, mm, mm. No, absolutely. I mean, and especially, you know, the CM level, just knowing that your CM is doing proper qualifications
Right.
on the suppliers that they're using. But okay, so I want to go back to something else that we touched on a little earlier, and that was lead times.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about lead times because this is something that you, you and I have dealt with on projects before.
Yes.
Um, Indeed. Why does every founder always underestimate them? And what does it actually cost the brand when you
Yeah.
get that wrong?
Um, I truly do believe professionals that are not kind of in the weeds of a production facility or supply chain or even product. Like those three areas really understand this, but 10 weeks does not always mean 10 weeks. Um, I feel like that's kind of the most blunt way to say it. And I think too, there's a lot of variables that you cannot control. And that is why it's always great to have a buffer. Um, I think the other aspect of why sometimes they do get underestimated is looking at shipping terms. I actually see this a lot, but you're working with a overseas supplier, they say, "Oh yeah, it'll be, delivered in 12 weeks." Right, but your terms with them is they're delivering to the port in 12 weeks. So you have to factor in that there's 4 to 6 weeks of shipping time, to the States, and you have to worry about customs. What if the container gets flagged by customs? It sits in customs for an extra 2 weeks. There's a lot of variables that are really outside of our control. Um, and it ends up costing brands a lot of money because they are, worried about cash flow. They don't want to put a deposit down too soon because it traps cash in inventory. It's there's a million variables and it's a risk analysis truly. Of really just understanding your lead times, understanding the variances that can happen within your lead times, and all of that depends on where you're sourcing from, who you're sourcing from, and really understand that full supply chain visibility of like, okay, it's coming from China. Um, you know, China's getting it from over here, understanding that, the facility in China isn't going to see it for 4 weeks. So that's a variable. Say that's delayed by 2 weeks, then China's 2 weeks behind, then they have a delay that causes 2 weeks. Now you're 4 weeks behind. There's so much complexity that can happen even with a simple ingredient. That understanding, your forecast, your demand plan, things like that are so important to build kind of that extra buffer into your lead time.
No, absolutely. And again, this goes right back to what you said, planning, you know,
Hmm.
planning. And planning doesn't just mean, oh, well, I've planned that we're going to launch in 6 months.
Right.
Good luck with that, first of all.
Yeah.
Um, but, it's even at the R&D stage, even at the concept stage. When you're working with your, product development, your chemist, your formulator, these are the kinds of conversations you should be having right there. How complicated is my formula? How
Right.
unique and rare are these raw ingredients? Because everything that you and I have just been discussing will come crashing down on you when it comes to scale up. Because what if you have a viral moment? I mean, everybody's like, oh, we just want a viral moment. Really? Be
Yeah.
careful what you wish for. Because, when that viral moment comes and you have not planned for it in advance, you know what I'm saying? Your formula is too
Hmm.
complicated. So trying to now source all of those ingredients, they may not be easily or readily available. Your components. You talked about luxury brands. Luxury brands will use luxury components. Luxury, and I'm not just talking about raw ingredients. When I say components, I mean packaging. You know,
Hmm.
um, those are not always easy to source, and sometimes they're custom made. You know,
Right.
um, if depending on who you are as a brand, sometimes that packaging is part of your IP, so it's custom. How quickly can you source that, and how quickly can it be sent to you? Yeah, don't even get me started with what happens at the ports, because
Yes. Right.
that's really where trust and verify comes in.
Yes.
Because if you have not vetted your suppliers and you don't know what their standing is with the FDA, and your stuff gets seized at the port.
Yeah. And that's where the supplier relationships extend even from, co-packers and 3PLs. It's your freight forwarder. They are almost the most important because I feel like customs is a beast in itself, and really having like a dedicated team that can guide you through that when you're juggling a million other things is
Mm,
second to none. It's,
mm,
one of I think carrier relationships and having a really strong team to help you move your product around the world is just as important as it is, in the facility that's manufacturing it and the R&D
mm,
team.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
so the set and forget doesn't exist in operations. Let's
No,
just leave
it
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 there.
doesn't. I mean, that's what opens you up to all of the issues, like uh, and we've all been there. I mean, I've been there, you reach out to a carrier, hey, okay, great, it's getting picked up this week, and then all of a sudden you find out that it wasn't picked up for a week and a half. That's, a great example of a set and forget that is catastrophic because now you're a week and a half behind delivery, whether it's to a retailer, to your warehouse. You needed that inventory after you were viral, you have an extra week, there's just so many things that go into these lead times of like it's just never 10 weeks. Like
Hmm.
there's a
Hmm.
million pieces that need to fit together to hit those 10 weeks if that's your lead time. And shipping time I think is the one that people really underestimate. Especially when there's weather related delays, things there's just a million things that can happen.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it takes a really tight-knit supply chain team to just ensure that things are working as smooth as
Hmm.
possible.
Hmm. And redundancy. I mean, I can't stress enough, you know, the concept of redundancy. And I'll give an example that, you and I are both familiar with. You're a brand, you have a special ingredient that comes from you, right? This is your raw material. You send it off. Say, for example, I don't know, it's frozen.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the weather.
Yeah.
And you have a distributor who, you've sent it off to them, you're shipping it from one side of the country to the other side of the country, but the other side of the country happens to be Florida and
Yeah.
happens to be Miami and happens to be 95 degrees and 100% humidity, and your frozen is not so frozen when it arrives on the other side. Do you have backup to resend through a different, and how quickly can you get it to your manufacturer? Because those are the kinds of things that become problematic if you were to not have redundancy in place.
Right.
But I want to just talk quickly about MOQs and inventory because
Hmm.
this is another part of, again, planning, redundancy, all of these things. Jimmy, how do brands end up so cash trapped in products they can't move? And where does it start? Because that's a problem I see all the time. And most
Hmm.
founders they don't prepare for it.
Yeah.
Not only do they not prepare for it, they don't even see it coming until it's already happened.
Yeah. I think the simple answer that probably crosses a lot of people's minds is like clearly your demand plan, supply plan is not aligned. Clearly there's a disconnect between ops and marketing. There's a disconnect between, cross-functional teams in the company. But I think one silent killer is uh, large MOQs to make economics work. You know, to make margin work, to make, really understanding like hey, we want to hit a 50% margin, 60% whatever it is. But we can only do that if we order 20,000 units. Um, I think that is a true silent killer with a lot of these brands and really just understanding your consumer base as well. I think having strong, steady sales is super important and understanding that trend when ordering product. Ordering 10,000 units when you sell 200 a week because you can get a good economic, unit price is not necessarily great because then you're paying for storage. You're paying for basically, dead inventory to sit on your warehouse floor for months and you're not selling it, you're not moving it, you're not making revenue. Um, I think those like, you know, just trying to make a margin work that, doesn't fit for your business at the time is the biggest detriment. It's always great to have a path forward to profitability. And I think that's what I would caution founders to do is like, okay, this is what it looks like now, but as we scale the business, we can get to here. And I think that vision is so important versus the oh, let's just do it now. Like it's just like, no, this is what it is now. This is what makes sense for the business. We're able to keep our cash flow in in check. It's not like crazy, but then also too, we have a path forward as we scale of, working with this co-packer, we can get this process or this cost down. Um, and just kind of like there's a path forward there. And I would just always urge founders to take it slow versus going off to the races sometimes.
And then that seems to be a big thing in beauty. It's just, fast to launch, go, go, go.
Yeah.
But
And
before, go ahead.
sorry, one other thing on beauty, because I think one thing that was interesting for me as I came into the industry was, um, batch sizing, and this is circling back to supplier relations as we always do. When you're vetting your supplier, like really understanding what size tanks do they have, like in terms of like when they're manufacturing their product, like what automations do they have, like what do their lines look like really understanding the facility that you're going to be producing in because that often dictates your MOQs. It also often dictates your economics and that path forward I just talked about in terms of like where do we see price reduction happening? Because price reduction isn't just, oh, we're going to order more and get a discount off the raw materials. It's also what can we automate? What can we make faster so that there's less labor? And really understanding the capabilities of the facility on a larger scale, um, to understand where those cost reductions come from. So I think like the batch sizing for these smaller brands, you want to work with these accredited um, co-packers, you want to work with these big, giant manufacturing facilities in the industry, but their smallest tank is X amount of gallons and it yields 20,000 units. So you're stuck at that. And so that's kind of another point of like, okay, maybe that's a partner down the road, but for right now, it's not the partner for us.
Yeah.
And understanding the tank sizes, I think, is something that founders underestimate.
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And just before I finish off on this segment, I want to go back to something that we have touched on pretty much in every question I've asked you along the way, but
Yeah.
now I really want to get to it because I said to you in the beginning, this is going to come up. I want to talk about vendor relationships. Like actually, because I find that what founders think we have a good relationship with our supplier means is very different to what it means in reality from an operational standpoint. So,
Mhm.
let's talk a bit about that, Jimmy. Give me your thoughts there.
Yeah. I mean, I think, when founders say, oh, we have a great relationship with our supplier, my first thought is we have great unit economics. They were willing to negotiate it with us on the contract. We haven't had any delays with any POs. Um, there's no glaring issues, right? Like from the outside, everything's working perfectly. POs are getting fulfilled, products flowing great, unit economics are working out. And I would say those are all things of a great supplier, but I think um, for me, and I don't want to speak for other supply chain professionals, but I think what separates those suppliers from the great ones is communication. And it's yeah, going back to kind of what we talked about previously, but you know, um, just the communication lines being fully open of like a text, hey, need to call you today about something. If you're getting that response from someone and you're able to just pick up the phone and call your account manager or whoever's working with you picks up immediately, is able to give you the rundown, they're on top of things. They're your eyes and ears on the floor, boots on the ground, as I said earlier. And so when they're able to call you and say, hey, we got a problem before you even know about it, that's a great supplier. Not only do they sometimes call with a problem, but they typically are like, hey, we got a problem, but here's what we're thinking. Or how do you want to handle, they're willing to be on the phone with you, work through problems together. It's not the, hey, this is a problem. Like, what are you gonna do? Like, it's a partnership, it's a tag team, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna figure out a plan together. And it's, the suppliers that you send an email and you have a response in an hour. And even if that response is, hey, I don't know, I'm checking on it, it's night and day difference because it gives founders, supply chain, everyone, peace of mind that you're being heard, your problems are, prioritized in the facility, and, we're working as fast as we can to get a solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for what you said in the beginning there, you said you can only speak for yourself. Trust me, for every single supply chain expert
Yeah.
I have ever spoken to, it's the same across the board. It is
Yeah.
100% hands down communication that is their pet peeve, their number one ask, their, this is what's going to keep you afloat because you don't live there. You don't live in other
Right.
people's heads. You don't live in other people's facilities. You only know what's in front of you now. And if they're not, bringing you up to speed immediately or worse, ghosting you.
Yes.
Um,
And if they're ghosting you, it's my head that's on a stick for,
yes,
because it's like, oh, like why don't we have an update? And it's always kind of reflected on
yes,
the supply chain team. But it's,
yes.
we're chasing, we're sprinting down, when we placed a PO with the supplier, they said, great, we're gonna launch X date. Like let's just use June 1st for an example. Okay, we'll place the PO, we're launching June 1st. A month to launch, I should understand when we're producing, when we're shipping, where the raw materials and all the statuses of those are, things like that. And if you're not getting those answers, it's
Mm, mm.
it's a
And
nightmare, truly, because you're in the dark.
And look, I mean, as far as I am concerned, and again, this may just be me, I
Hmm.
would rather have a relationship with someone who told me the truth, no matter what it was, at every
Exactly.
step of the way, than
Yep.
try to hide something, sugarcoat it, sneak around things so that they avoid taking responsibility.
Yep.
Because that for me is a pet peeve. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Whether, I have always tried to be in any situation I'm working in, I am going to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly as I get it. I'm not going to just call you because something's good and because I'm scared to tell you that something crappy has happened. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I need you to know because I need you to say, okay, Jimmy, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what's happened. Here's what I'm thinking. Help me walk through this because I think
Yep.
we can get this sorted out if we do this as a team. And that's okay. It's okay
Yeah.
to say I screwed up. It's okay to say you know what I mean? I don't know. It's okay to say, you know what I mean? This has happened as long as you're saying it and you're saying it immediately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. 100%. I couldn't agree more.
Okay. Good. So now we can move on. All right, so we've covered the operational, can't speak. So we've covered the operational mistakes, right? Let's go a layer deeper now and talk about the process and documentation infrastructure. I mean, we touched on documentation a little bit before, but
Hmm.
infrastructure that almost
Yeah.
no indie brand builds in. And, and then what happens when that is all missing? Like I said, we did touch on it a little, but now I really
Hmm.
want to get into it. And I suspect that this part of the conversation might make people a little bit uncomfortable. And the truth is good. That's the point. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I need us to focus on this because goodness, Jimmy,
Yeah.
a well-documented supply chain operation it's vital. So talk to me about what that actually looks like at the indie brand level, and
Yeah.
and what should exist that usually doesn't.
Yeah. I think the key difference between like a great documented supply chain versus a not so great one is uh, like reactive versus proactive. I think when a company is scaling and they're proactively creating documentation, they're proactively creating tools and processes to like build the business. Um, and no process when it's created almost before it's needed is going to be great, but it gives you the framework to reiterate on it and improve it. Typically, if you're reacting, you're documenting for a problem that's already happened, and then by then it's too late. And I think a lot of the documents for these indie brands is they're like scaling really great, say they have a viral moment, and then issues in the supply chain start popping up and they don't have a framework or a guide to help them fix it. Um, and or the other kind of scenario is they don't have the documents or the tools to have the visibility to see the problem coming until it's too late. So I think like, and that's where like Excel is so great. You can build a bunch of processes that fit the size of your business for what it needs right now, and having a little bit of visibility set compared to none is will save you so much money and so much time just trying to figure out what's going on, right? I'm talking inventory model, production planning model, understanding your forecast, understanding your cash flow, especially at these stages where, you don't have you know, a ton of cash in the bank to just front load your inventory. You have to be smart about it. Really understanding your production plan and your cash flow model of how you're going to fund your inventory to continue to scale your sales without stocking out is the tightrope that a lot of these brands walk on. And if they don't have, a specific model that shows how they're going to walk on it, that's when people fall off.
Mm, No, absolutely. And like I said before, it's not like you need one or two documents. You need an entire dossier. Oh, look, there's my
Yeah.
dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. The dogs are now getting restless. Okay, so
Yeah.
so let's before they start getting too restless.
Yeah.
Let's quickly talk SOPs. You actually mentioned SOP in passing,
Hmm.
but we didn't get into what standard operating procedures are. Who
Hmm.
should own them? What should they cover? And what goes wrong when SOPs do not exist?
Right. Um, for sure, the person who is closest to the task should own it. And I think really SOP should exist for any redundant task within a business. Whether it's ops, market, cross-functional, like everything should be documented if it's a redundant process. There should also be SOPs that give insight into the supply chain. Um, Purely high level of how it functions, where your suppliers are, who you're ordering what from, lead times, things like that. I do believe if they don't exist, typically that process is living in someone's brain.
Mm,
And that creates a larger issue. Because if it's living in someone's brain, there's context there that isn't shared. And a lot of the time, the knowledge is not distributed correctly because it's living in someone's brain. They're not kind of like throwing it on a piece of paper and organizing it. And typically, when you are then distributing the knowledge, things get lost, context gets missed, and the process changes,
mm,
typically in a more negative way.
mm. And it was in one of the previous episodes, we were talking about documents with a regulatory person, and and what he'd said was that you've got to think of SOPs um in terms of, I don't know, look at like a McDonald's, right? How do
Hmm.
you have McDonald's all over the world, in every country in the world, and they're exactly the same? The
Right.
food is produced the same way, the quality is the same. None of that can happen if standard operating procedures do not exist.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so this one's important, Jimmy. What happens when the one person, because you talked about living in your head, the one
Hmm.
person who knows everything leaves the company? And how often does that single point of failure actually exist in indie beauty brands?
Hmm. I think I would say the not having a single point of failure in your company at this stage is probably an outlier. That's how common it is. Like it's especially in operations, when it's kind of like the fundamentals of your business, right? I think, when you have that one person, they know how everything works, they hold all the relationships, um, and then they leave, they might document everything. Say you have SOPs, say you have a well-oiled process, everything. But you lose context. You really do. If they're handling everything, managing everything as kind of a single person team, they're in the meetings alone with the suppliers, they're managing the POs alone with the suppliers. Um, there's a lot of context that goes undocumented, whether it's through phone calls or, through Teams, Zoom meetings, things like that. There's a lot of context that doesn't get documented. And I feel like everyone is guilty of it. Like, you're just having a conversation. You don't think that this part of the conversation is important, but in a year it could be. You never know. So I do think like the context piece of it is something I don't think we talk about enough.
Mm,
I think that's like the big one for me. I think the others are supplier relationships, and that's where I think um founders really do need to have strong relationships with their vendors because, if there's one person on your team that has managed these relationships for 3 years, and you're like, oh, everything's great, like they're handling it great, they're doing great, I don't want to overstep, like I think that that's a problem, because I think that if that person were to leave, the supplier, co-packer, whatever, needs to understand that the founder's still there, they still run and own the business, and that relationship is the main priority between the two, between the co-packer and the brand.
mm, mm,
As much as the account manager and the supply chain manager work on the day-to-day business, there always needs to be that overarching relationship between the founder and the plant manager, or just even the account manager. There just has to be that relationship, because I do feel like when that single point failure leaves, deteriorating that relationship is has a more longer lasting effect than processes losing context.
mm, mm. No, look, I mean, what I've seen, particularly with smaller startups, indie brands, is, once they have all the positions filled, they just take it for granted.
Right.
Right? Oh, the ops, we have an ops person. Oh, we have an engineer. Oh, you know what I mean? Like whatever it is, right? They just take for granted, check the box, and then don't bother to make sure that the people that they have in those positions, number one, are happy and feel relevant in those positions. They feel like they're growing. They feel like they're fulfilled. They feel like, what I'm saying? And I'm not saying that it's a CEO or a founder's job to keep people happy. That's not their job, right?
Right.
But I think that there is also, relationships with your own staff, within your company, company culture that will keep people because people move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
People move on for many reasons, right? They're not always bad reasons. Um,
Right.
but what I find more often than not is that people do move on because they do feel like, what am I doing here?
Right.
This isn't what I signed up for. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And they just feel like no one's even noticed. You know
Right.
what I mean? They just take totally for granted that everything's going right because of them. You know what I mean? Not
Right.
going right because of you. So it's like,
Right.
oh, fine. You know what I mean? I'll find
Yeah.
somebody who
Yeah.
appreciates what I do. But look, I don't know if there's an answer to that. Like, is there a way to do that better? I don't know what the answer is. I think maybe just it's a personality thing. I don't know. I don't know. I think company culture does play a part, and as leaders, leadership should be the ones who are accountable for company culture. But
hmm
unless you want to react to that, I don't want to
Yeah.
kind of
Well,
stay on the
I
company
think,
culture thing.
yeah, I think sometimes with a single point failure, it's the lack of support sometimes. I think especially in the pressure cooker that supply chain really is, feeling like you're managing all the relationships, all the PO, like that whole operation with, not that oversight is needed, but the support of knowing founders or leaders have their own relationship with the co-packer, and that not everything is just sitting on the shoulders of that one person to make sure that that relationship is as strong as it can be.
Mm,
I think that is adds to the pressure cooker effect that supply chain already is, because things go great, no one says anything, but at the second something goes wrong, everyone
Mm,
knows about it.
mm.
And that's a lot of pressure in itself.
Yeah, yeah. No, no, that's a good point. Okay, so next question I have for you is at what stage of growth should a founder be building this infrastructure? Because most wait too long, and then
Mhm.
what's the signal that they've already missed it?
Yeah. They need to be building the documentation as soon as possible. No one wants to sit in an office and build SOPs for days. You should be doing it when it takes you a few hours at max. Like if you can sit down and do all of your SOPs for your business in like a few hours, I would 1000% recommend it because those SOPs will never not be useful. They are the framework. You can always process, improve, reiterate on them. But having that framework and just having that document infrastructure is so important because it just saves you time. I would say when, you start hearing, oh, when this is over, we'll document it. When things slow down, we'll start, it's not going to slow down. You have to get ahead of it before things start to like speed up. That would be my suggestion for sure.
Mm, absolutely. All right, so let's get into the actionable layer here. I mean, what founders and investors should actually do differently starting now. So, Jimmy, if a founder came to you and said, I think my supply chain is a mess, but I don't know where to start, what's the first thing you would look at?
I think I would actually ask them a question. I think I would say, why? Why do you think your supply chain is a mess? Because I feel like that answer would probably lead me in the right direction. If they came back and said, I don't know, the first thing I feel like is like, let's look at inventory and let's look at your production schedule. Um, I feel like understanding what they have on hand, what they've committed to from a reorder perspective, um, inventory levels of not only just finished good, but packaging, raw materials, what's in transit, things like that. Um, and just really just understanding what's on the dock. Like what do you got coming in? And then understanding the sales and just really trying to understand the balance of the demand and supply um, forecast to ensure they're not gonna out of stock and they're not going to overstock. Because I do think a lot of the supply chain operations re relies on inventory. If you don't have inventory, everyone's gonna know. So if you can have inventory, have a well-oiled machine of customers getting their orders and retail orders shipping out in full, um, triaging that gives you the breathing room to then look at kind of the greater issues of visibility, vendor relationships, unit economics, margins, things like that.
Okay, now for the investors in the audience. What are the questions investors should be asking a beauty brand about their supply chain operations? The ones that most diligence processes skip entirely.
Yeah. I would expect a lot of investors are looking at your COGS, your margin, lead times, cash flow, things like that. Maybe even capacity, like, okay, you're producing X amount today. Like, if we double the business in a year, like, can you do that? Things like that. I think getting a little more nitty-gritty on the data side is really understanding like the life cycle of your inventory. You're receiving a shipment in Q1 and it's lasting you to the end of Q3. Is that a order quantity problem? Like what's driving that? Is it lack of sales? Is it MOQs too high? Is it over ordering? Kind of like questions like that. I also think a lot probably don't fully understand bottlenecks and the disruptions that can happen in the supply chain. They, you know, understand even like vendor scorecards, like how successful are the vendor relationships? Are your vendors typically delivering on time? Is there like an average 4 week delay? What's causing some of those bottlenecks and disruptions in your supply chain that are maybe causing some issues on like the cash flow and the margin and the COGS and just kind of the overstocking or understocking kind of glaring issues that can pop up in the due diligence phase.
Mm, okay. So, Jimmy, I'm going to pivot here for a second and talk about fractional leadership roles.
Hmm.
Um, because you do this kind of work and same, but there's a lot of confusion about what it actually is, especially
Hmm.
since people sometimes get it confused with consulting.
Hmm.
But in terms of operations specifically, what does fractional operations actually solve for a brand? And at the same time, what does it not solve?
Yeah. I think the greatest asset of fractional work is being able to build your operations and supply chain for a fraction of the cost of a full-time employee. I think the reason that a lot of companies don't start building their operations until it's too late is because they don't want to allocate that cash to a full-time employee to do it for them. Where fractional work comes in, it allows companies to who, most likely are not prepared to hire someone 40 hours a week to come in, manage their operations, and start kind of building that infrastructure, building SOPs, building process, managing vendor relationships, understanding your contracts, building the inventory management tools, things like that that you don't want to wait until it's too late to start building. You can, hire a fractional operations leader for 5 to 10 hours a week, and they can manage that for you. At that current scale. I think where sometimes there's a discrep or an issue with fractional leadership is accountability. And the reason I say that is because understanding the expectation of accountability. When you are hiring someone for 5 hours a week, they cannot hold the same accountability as a full-time employee for 40 hours, right? And just understanding that relationship and also understanding, having someone 5 hours to manage operations when you're at 5 million a year, when that goes up to 50 million, like really understanding that they probably can't take on a $50 million brand with what you want them to do for 5 hours a week. So I think sometimes it's, they come on early and it's those awkward conversations that do need to happen around budget, around hours, around capacity, and around
Mm,
accountability, that are really important to have to ensure like fractional operations works for you.
No, absolutely. And to close out the segment, what does a supply chain operation that's genuinely ready to scale actually look like? And so, what has to be true about it?
Yeah. The business needs to scale on the systems, not the people. If you have a ton of process and a ton of systems that require manual intervention, um, a ton of, even a single point failure, going back to that conversation. If it's scaling on the basis of this person's doing everything and it's on their shoulders, that is a business that's not ready to scale. I think a lot of people would say that supply chain is like the manual grunt work in the behind the scenes, but truly, like when you're talking about supply chain in a CTG space, we're kind of more like monitors of systems versus um the people actually doing the work, because the people actually doing the work are the guys on the floor of the supply of the supplier and the co-packer and things like that. And we just have to make sure that we have the systems in place to grant us the visibility to make sure things are running smoothly, and emergencies and issues don't just pop out of nowhere as best to our ability.
Right, right. Okay, last question. And this is something I ask everybody. All right, so, um, and I'm talking about this week now, not this quarter,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
This
yeah.
week. What is the one thing a founder can do to meaningfully reduce their operational risk?
Um, Identify your single point failures and identify your bottlenecks and potential disruptions. Um, I truly don't, if your answer is I don't have any, look again. I just, and that's the thing. I mean, it's not even about finding a solution for that this week. It's understanding that you have it, and just putting together a plan of how to fix it. And understanding, like, if we have a bottleneck, if you have single point failure. It's not going to be fixed overnight, but it just has to be acknowledged. I think not acknowledging it and sweeping it under the rug is what causes the issues.
Mm. Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. But in closing, here's what I want everyone watching and listening to take away from this. The beauty industry runs on relationships, as you heard us mention. Founder to CM, brand to supplier, operator to vendor. And that's not a bad thing. But trust without verification is not a relationship, that's a liability. The brands that scale without blowing up are not the ones with the best suppliers, right? I'm going to use that loosely. They're the ones that vet their suppliers. Jimmy, thank you so much for being here. This was incredible. It was so much fun, and I love talking to my friends when I'm.
Yes.
So thank you for going into the operational reality that most people in this industry only discover after something goes horribly wrong.
Hmm.
Because this is the conversation I've wanted to be having with you for a while, and I'm glad that you finally did this with me.
Yes.
For everyone watching and listening, as always, if you found this conversation valuable, and trust me, this is a special one, please like it, share it, and subscribe here on YouTube or Spotify. The interview series also now lives on Substack if you would like to read this one or any of the past interviews in written form. And of course, you can also follow me and Jimmy on LinkedIn, where we share more expert insights on the issues and answers that drive smarter beauty investment. I'm Mallory Johnson. Thanks for watching and listening, and I will see you all next time.